There are a few differences that you'll notice in the object literal sample that creates the customer object. The first is that the code is a single statement, with curly brackets enclosing the entire right side of the assignment expression, which includes all of the property definition. And so the code looks like this: var customer, and then all of the properties and methods and so forth are included within that object literal in that single statement. The next difference is that instead of adding properties one statement at a time, using the name of the customer object, the object literal code uses a list of comma delimited items that consist of a property name, colon, and value. And then finally, defining getters and setters is a bit more efficient and requires a little bit less typing. The overall structure of these is more similar to what you can do in languages like C#, Java, and Visual Basic.net. Here's the code that creates the customer object as an object literal. So we have a var customer, naming it the same kind of object again, and then the opening curly bracket of an object literal. And then it defines the properties using this property name, colon, value. So this is the initial value of each of the properties. Sales becomes an empty array. Name, city, region, postal code, and country. Here's the code that defines the read-write customer ID property. As you can see, you use the get keyword in front of the property name in order to identify that this is a getter. And similarly, use set in front of the function that defines the setter. And then otherwise, the code that defines the getter and setter for the customer ID property is pretty much the same. It's again checking to make sure that the customer ID is greater than a -1 and then returns it, otherwise it throws an error, and then checks to see if it's a number, if it's an integer, and if it's less than 0. And if it runs the gauntlet, then it updates the customer ID value. So one important difference here between the object literal and using the object constructor is that this code is executing within the object itself, and so you can use the this keyword to reference that property. And you can do the same thing with any of the properties that you define within the object. And because you're using the object literal, you don't need to use the define property method of the base object in order to define the properties. All right, next bit of code defines the read-only sales, uses that same get keyword notation in order to define the function. And so it looks like it's actually defining a function. And it's doing the same thing, returning the same values as the other example. And then the last bit here defines the record sale and toString method. And those, again, are defined as properties within the object literal that are implemented as function objects. And this is overriding the toString method of the base object. So as you can see, this code, when you compare it to the previous example of using the object constructor, is quite a bit cleaner. The biggest difference is that using the object constructor, you have to execute individual statements in order to add features to the new customer object, whereas this is all done within a single statement, an object literal. And you have a little bit cleaner syntax for defining the various properties.